course, the Princess of
Even
Wales
more
is the
daunting
clever
for the
character,
prince, around the same time, he was forced to contemplate what it would be like to wear the crown without his wife by his side.
I mean, that is so daunting and terrifying. Like, they're so young. Like, this is not the thing that they anticipated at all, which is cancer. It is so unbelievably terrible. And so that was, I'm sure, just absolutely devastating, especially for William, who lost his mother so young. I think there was, you had that wound, and to sort of have it, kind of be scabbed over. It's still there, it still itches, but you've kind of dealt with it. To have it sort of ripped out because your wife now, who is also very young, is facing, this disease that can be terminal is I'm sure very frightening.
Like his father, Kate had cancer.
This, of course, came as a huge shock. And William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family.
Catherine's heartfelt announcement came after weeks of intense and sometimes bizarre speculation.
So yeah, the whole hashtag Where is Kate thing, I remember at the time, I was not going to do a video about it because I just thought it was silly. I mean, it's just pure silliness. But the thing is, and the terrible thing is that this silliness somehow got picked up by mainstream news outlets, I would say more so in the US than in the UK. And they kept going with this. And I'm sure the chaos and everything, and you even have, obviously, a lot of it was stirred up by the Sussex Squad, which continues to spread baseless rumors about affairs. And, poor Thomas Kingston, who was the husband of Lady Gabriella Windsor, and William, and all these sorts of horrific things. And like Christopher Bosie, who was going on and on and on about that stupid Windsor video. And I'm like, it was taken on an iPhone through a car windshield. Yeah, it's not going to be the best quality. You can't really, people were just trying so hard to create a conspiracy where it was just most likely she happened to feel kind of good that day and wanted to get out of the house. And who can blame her for that? So this obviously was hugely devastating to them, though.
About her health.
Where is Kate Middleton?
I have to say again, what was so incredibly stupid about this whole thing was that they told us we would not see her until Easter. That was March 31st, and she gave her announcement like March 19th or 18th or something like that, 20th. And so it's like she was not even expected to be back. And yet they're making, like, where is she? She told us she was recovering from surgery. It's not that hard, people. Sorry. And I just still, it's so dumb.
Where are you, Kate?
It made an already terrible time even more stressful for the future king.
I can't imagine how difficult that would have been. We know Catherine's surgery was very major, and that had to be really, really challenging because she's recovering from surgery, then undergoing chemo, and then he shares a bit more here as well.
Within a couple weeks, if you're Prince William, you find out that both your wife and your father have cancer. And that is, I couldn't believe it.
Do you remember that phone call between you and William about?
So this is actually, it's very devastating. William was devastated, and we get more of an insight here into sort of what happened and who they told first. Because if you remember, we had this sort of kerfluffle that Catherine was originally on the schedule to oversee some of the troops for Trooping the Color. And then all of a sudden they're like, later the day, all of a sudden they're like, oh, no, that wasn't confirmed. Like, they weren't supposed to announce it, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, I'm sure that went through Buckingham Palace's office. And so I have speculated at the time and still believe that I think a lot of Catherine and William staff members were not made aware of the situation for a good chunk of time until they knew they had to tell people. And I think this sort of reflects that, but Jason is one of those people who is within that very, very trusted circle to get information like this.
About Kate's diagnosis?
It was awful, absolutely awful. It's the lowest I've ever seen him. But the problem was that all this crazy sort of conspiracy theory stuff kicked off in the background online. Was she really ill? But they didn't want to say yet that she had cancer because they hadn't told the children, and they were still working through how to tell the children.
So that is, just so devastating that this horrible stuff was going on behind the scenes, endless attacks. And they hadn't told the kids yet because they weren't sure how to tell the kids yet. And they weren't given that opportunity because of the fervor created by, I would argue, crazy people, is that it ended up where, they had to announce it anyways. I mean, it was about the time that she needed to announce something because she wasn't going to be back in time for Easter. And that was sort of the timeline that we were given initially. So she had to sort of make an announcement within a week of Easter, I would say, about it. And so it was getting about to be that time, but to have all this chaos, especially they're dragging, again, Lady Gabriella Windsor, her husband who ended up ending his own life, Thomas Kingston, and saying that there was an affair and an attack or something, like crazy speculation that was so unbased in reality. And you obviously saw a little bit of that Windsor video where Catherine and William were walking, and Christopher Bosie and others were like analyzing that thing to death. I'm like, it's not that big a deal. But the challenge of telling the kids, and how do you tell young children such devastating news, and making sure that they understand that their mom's probably going to be okay, but letting them know this is serious at the same time, and dealing with their emotions and everything. I mean, that's an immense challenge. And to have all of that fervor going on in the background, which was totally unnecessary because we were all told the timeline initially, is just absolutely crazy to me.
Although I finished chemotherapy,
The whole world was relieved last September when the princess announced she'd finished her treatment.
each day as it comes.
But to her husband and children, it meant even more.
Very, very sweet. That still is, I think, a great video Catherine and William did. I know some people think it's too modern. I think it was a perfect touch of getting a view into their lives. But at the same time, they understand the difference between personal and private, and professional and public. And so they gave us this wonderful glimpse into their lives, which I think is very sweet.
This time has above all reminded William and me to reflect and be grateful for the simple yet important things in life, which so many of us often take for granted.
Jason
So very, very sweet again.
says what's always mattered most to this family is family.
They made very clear when we were doing things like planning out the year ahead or going through the diary or anything like that, is they had to have time to be parents first.
So I really do think this is an amazing thing for Catherine and William, of course, to do, is to be parents first, because we've seen a lot of trouble with royals. Now, they have to balance this very carefully. But we've been sort of clear on this as well, that you don't look like you're sort of avoiding things that you should be doing just because you're like, oh, I have to be family first. We can't do anything else here. I think there's a careful balance that must be made. So far, they seem to be doing a pretty good job, but it is definitely a bit of a challenge. So definitely something Catherine and William have to look at constantly. But if they raise 3 well-adjusted children, they will be worth their weight in gold to the British people.